those things that make you feel so different and so small when you're younger become the very thing that you decide to start championing with your life.
And someone said on social media they love that women of color is driving this conversation today. I want to talk about college because you were born to two doctors. So it was kind of, oh, you're Indian, you're going to become a doctor. So you did actually start down that path, and then what happened?
Well, a lot of things, I think. But I felt a lot of pressure to be a doctor in the sense that I think it was what I knew. It was where my family, a majority of the people in my family were physicians. And it was just the expectation. I think in second grade, I said, I want to be a doctor like Dad. And it was like, oh, you made this decision on your own.
Yeah.
That was what we were going to do.
They won the lottery.
Yeah. And then I think as I got older, my heart really wasn't in it in so many different ways. And I think I realized, I think it's unfortunate because a lot of Indian American families, from my personal experience that I've interacted with, it's just the arts are not as at the forefront than anything else. It's more of an extracurricular that you do for your college, sort of application, but outside of that, it's just not as encouraged as I think it can be, and I think that's definitely shifting with our generation and younger.
And performing was something that you always did. You're trained in Indian classical dance.
Yeah, so I grew up classically trained in a form of Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi, which I will say, so for Miss America I did a Bollywood dance, and I usually say it's kind of like asking a ballet, because I grew up also in ballet point and jazz, and I loved it. But it's like asking a ballet dancer to do hip hop, and it's very different, and you're very trained in certain ways, and so a part of me kind of felt like a sellout doing this Bollywood dance because I was so classically trained, and it was just what needed to happen for I think for a lot of other things to fall into place, because at that time Bollywood was really up and coming, people were starting to understand it more, and so I said, if I can actually use this as an opportunity and an avenue to educate others, and hopefully one day classical Indian dance will be, at the forefront, this is just a stepping stone to that.
Don't give away the whole farm because I'm leading up to that.
Okay.
I want to talk about college years as well, Amanda. Where did you go undergrad? Because I know where you went to grad.
Yeah. So undergrad, I went to Howard University, which is a historically black college in D.C. Super excited that I got in, and I remember the first day I went, and I was standing on the yard, and you had these, black kids standing on the steps of the arts building doing Shakespeare, and you had the cheerleaders shaking it over here, and there was a DJ, and it just felt like the melting of all of these worlds, right? All of the things that you want to be, and I just felt at home in this real way for the first time. And I'd always gone to schools where I was the one or one of two, all of these things, and all of a sudden I wasn't, and there was no majority, there was no minority rather,
right.
And so it was just the most freeing experience, because imagine never explaining yourself, everyone gets the joke, there's no reference that needs to be explained, and then I realized, this is how white people walk through the world, it actually, if you don't ever have to explain anything, how much more time do you have to get that much deeper into everything?
Right.
And so I just feel like I had such different conversations, and I learned so much about different types of black families, and how we were all the same and all different. And Howard has black people from all over the world, so I was also learning about Nigerian culture and Malian culture and Caribbean culture, and West Coast black people are very different than Southern black people, and just learning it all, and the food and the music and it was just the ultimate melting pot and total and complete freedom in a way that I had absolutely never felt. And anytime I get into spaces like this, or I'm around women, or just different spaces, as you were talking about women of color leading this forefront, I just think about how much more we could do if we didn't have to constantly explain ourselves, if we didn't have to apologize or make space for others. What if people were making space for us? And so I just try and think back to those days sometimes when it gets really hard, especially with post-undergrad. I went into investment banking. So real life.
Yeah.
I was the only black person on my football field worth the floor of bankers. And just such different spaces, and how that can make you feel big or small, or how much you contribute and you feel valued in those spaces. You can just be, walking through the world, two different people.
Yeah.
And
it's back to that duality that we were talking about. But then you went to Harvard, where you went for business school, and that was like a different playing field because you learned that you were surrounded by a lot of people that had failed at the startup culture, and that kind of normalized that risk for you.
Yeah. It was very different, I think, and probably a lot of you guys can relate, which is if you grow up brown in this country and your parents came up and like you're the generation that's supposed to make it that much farther, I think there are a lot of like expectations. You're talking about being a doctor, expectations of like where you're supposed to take it and, towing the party line and like going through, going up the corporate ladder in this very like structured way. And so I graduated from undergrad and went into investment banking, and that's what I thought I was going to do too. And after 3 years, got very bored. So went to HBS, to Harvard Business School, and I just realized the freedom, again, that other people had in failing. I'd always taken these very structured routes through the world, and all of a sudden there were people saying, I'm on my third business, the first two flopped, but I'm hoping to get a couple million for this next one. And I'm like, who are you? Or like, I was a PR person, I was a lawyer, I was a this, and like, I'm on to the next. And like, I'm like, and your parents support you? Like, who are you? And I just, again, it was this realization that like, failure can be normalized. If you even want to call it failure, it's actually just life. And it's okay because there will be people there to support you that believe in you and understand who you are and the way you're trying to make in the world. And like, if you surround yourself with enough of those types of people, you'll actually always be okay. And like, ultimately, you realize that it's you who needs to be okay with you and the way you are perceived in the world. And so HBS was just without it, I would have never become an entrepreneur. It is where I saw people fail and try again and then be rewarded for failing in the way that I'd never thought of before. And I thought, okay, I can be that person. I can try. If I at least got here, then like somebody believes in me somehow and like will give me a couple $1 million to fail. And so that was the beginning of this journey.
Yeah. And that's where you met your co-founder.
Yes.
But before we continue with that story, I want to revert back to when you decided the pageant circuit was where you're going to go. And I love the fact that you had to sell it to your Indian parents if this was going to give you a scholarship. Because I remember telling my parents that I was going to join a sorority, and they're like, why? I'm like, well, it's an academic honor. Okay. So when you told me that story over the phone, it reminded me of that. But it was what was the first title that you got a $50,000 scholarship?
Yeah, so I started competing in the teen program. I have to say that Miss America and Miss USA are two different systems. So Donald Trump was never my boss, never interacted with him, never associated. But so the Miss America system is very much what we like to say is the oldest competition in history. We're actually encroaching on our 100th anniversary now. So that was the very first sort of competition that existed like this. And so they had just launched a teen program when I was in high school, now 16 years ago. And so I was kind of one of the first contestants in the teen program, and they offered scholarship for it. And one of my friends, who was a Miss America junkie, because it really is a cult following, I feel like that's the only way to describe it, she said, hey, like they're starting this, I think you'd be really good at it, why don't you try it, you have a talent, and that's kind of what differentiates us from other systems as well. And you have a community service platform, so why don't you think about this? And so I was like, well, I would love to do it because I loved performing so much, and that's what I wanted to do. And so trying to sell this to my parents was they were actually offering a $10,000 scholarship for the contestant who won Miss Michigan Teen, and then a $30,000 scholarship for the winner of the Miss America Teen competition. And so I went on, so this is what I phrased, I was like, I was entering the scholarship program, like totally Miss Congeniality style. And my parents said, okay, like if you can raise the money to and work, your side job to pay for everything that you're doing, we'll let you do it. So I was like, okay, that actually taught me a lot in terms of hustling and how to get money. And so did that, went to a thrift store, bought like a $50 pageant gown, or dress, I should say, and saying I will survive for my very first competition. Happened to win, and then went on to win Miss Michigan Teen, and then was first runner-up to actually Miss America Teen, the national competition. And I will always say that first runner-up is the worst, position in the world because you're so close yet so far. And I think in the outside world they're like, oh, but you did so great. But in your mind internally, I walked away thinking, well, I sang for my first competition, and then I ended up doing a Bollywood dance for the national competition, and I placed first runner-up, and I thought, maybe if I had sang, then I would have won. Or you think about all the things that you could have done or should have done, or in terms of when we're talking about failure, of thinking...
And there was a part of you that felt that you sold out a little bit by not doing traditional dance and doing the Bollywood dance.
And so there was a lot of factors that went into this, but the best part about it was that I walked away with $30,000 in scholarship money because $20,000 was first runner-up, and then the 10 that I'd won. And so with that money and the generous help of my parents, bless their hearts, I was able to graduate debt-free from undergrad. I went to University of Michigan, which was a public school, so a little more affordable. So I was lucky in that sense. But in terms of going to graduate school, which I knew eventually I wanted to pursue, that was kind of on my own. And I started competing again with that in mind.
And when you decided that you were going to compete again, I realize I'm skipping through a bunch of different steps here, but when you did decide that you were going to compete again, what was the variable there? It was like the last year that you couldn't compete.
It was the last year. So to compete in Miss America, you have to be between the ages of 18 and 24. And so I went to college, living my best life, I was going to do college, and I loved it, and I would do it the same way again. But it was kind of on the back burner of, if I'm really going to commit to this, I know I need to dedicate a lot of time and energy. And so it was I saved myself 2 years to compete. So the first year, I competed for Miss New York, and I was doing a post-bac program in Syracuse. That's where my family was at the time. So I was in that phase where I graduated college, everyone was moving on to things, and I was moving with my parents. So that was a very low point, and I thought to myself, well, maybe I have the time to focus on pageant world in spite of doing a post-bac and applying to medical school. That was kind of not where my heart was. And so I did that, and the first year I ended up placing second runner-up to Miss New York. And I actually was second runner-up to... Do you want me to continue, or should I say this?
Well,
okay,
I think where I really want you to go with this is that, at some point you felt like you sold out, and then there was a point where you decided that you were going to just be who you were.
Yeah. So I was second runner-up to Mallory Hagan, who won the title of Miss New York. And a long story short, she went on to win the title of Miss America, representing the state of New York. And I was watching Miss America, and I was hysterical, and I called my mom, and I said to her, Mom, I will never win Miss America now. What are the chances that Miss New York will win 2 years in a row? And she said, well, you haven't even won Miss New York yet, so why don't we focus on that first, if that's what you're really after? And that was kind of that was a really big turning point, because I had heard a lot of feedback from my first time competing at Miss New York. Oh, you're too Indian, be more American. America's just not ready for Bollywood talent. They don't understand you. And all of these factors that you get in opinions of people telling you what it takes to win or everything. And I just remember that following year, it was my last year, I put all my eggs in one basket. And I said, you know what, if I'm going to win, it has to be in my way and in my terms. And I think the biggest life lesson that I've learned from competition, which I think you learn a lot, ironically, is that authenticity is really what's most important. If you actually actively believe in something and believe in yourself, and I know how cliche that sounds, that's really that's all that matters, is that you love what you're doing and you actually believe in it. And other people will see it.
Yeah. If you believe in yourself and you believe in your product, you can sell anything.
Exactly. Yes.
Amanda, you met your co-founder at Harvard. You were in a musical together, and that's kind of when you realized that you both worked well together.
Yeah.
And then what happened after graduation?
Yeah, so my co-founder, KJ Miller, and I met during the school musical. So it's a student-run variety show, and that year was based loosely, because we did not have any of the rights, based loosely on Mean Girls. And so she was in the show singing, and I did all the costumes behind the scenes for the show, because I love to sew and put things together. And that's very much our personalities. She loves being on stage and performing and talking to people, which I do in a ballet, more reserved way. Yeah. But I love being backstage and meeting people and putting all the things together. And so we worked really well during this production and got to know each other, and then just kind of had fun in our own little secret language and jokes backstage. And so we learned through that process, as well as through some school projects, that we worked really well together. We are a really good yin and yang in terms of our personalities, our working styles. Some people would meet us and not get it, and then other people who spent 1 more minute would be actually, I get it. Like, you all do it well. And so we knew we wanted to work together, but we didn't have the idea. So we graduated from HBS in spring 2014. We both moved back to New York. So she went into consulting at Deloitte, was doing retail consulting, so very much still focused on a product category. And I went to Barney's, and I was running their digital business development world, which was just trying to piece together in somewhat of a thoughtful way, the online and offline store experience. Like, how could we build out brands and services that made a little more sense to your everyday life? But we were still hustling on the idea. And so we would get together, mark our calendar every 2 weeks with lots of wine in either her apartment or mine in Harlem, and think through ideas. We would talk through every article we'd read, every video we'd watched, all of our experiences across every channel, every conversation we'd had. And we went through everything. I mean, we talked through, should we start a media platform? Should we start there were some other personal care services that we talked about. And one night we were just talking about, like, hacks, like all the things you kind of get by in life and you put together yourself, and you're doing all this extra work that apparently nobody else has to do. And I said to her, I've been looking for the perfect new lipstick for like 3 years. And that, we both recall, was like the moment that kicked it all off. And she was like, if you ever met her, you'd understand. What? I can't find any lipstick. Like, that's her personality. And she said, I was like, you can't find any lipstick? And so we just had this whole Beavis and Butthead moment, honestly. It was like so ridiculous about how we both felt excluded, not only in, you know, the product offering, but not seeing ourselves on the shelf, like not seeing ourselves in the ads and the content, walking into a store and feeling other right away, just because none of the models look like you, and how different the world could be, and that we felt like we were two educated, high-income people. Like, if anybody was going to be serviced, wouldn't it be us? And we weren't. And so that was the moment where we said, okay, how are friends and family feeling? How is the larger community feeling? And we just kept getting all of these positive notes that was like, go after this thing. Like, we feel it too. We understand the pain point. We understand the burden. So the vision from the very beginning has been, we want to build this global brand that is the home and the voice of women of color. We want to celebrate your beauty in a way that no one else can, because we understand you in a way that no one else does. And like, what if a beauty company would actually prioritize you? Not just lip service to prioritizing you, but actually do it in the way they create their products, in the way they create their content, in their brand voice. Something that is so personal. I mean, like putting something on your face that is absorbed into your bloodstream. It can't be more personal than that. And it should be from a brand that gets you. You know, that's where you should be spending your dollars. And so that moment in fall 2015 was the moment. And so we launched January 2017. We're just over 2 years old.
So you started making lipsticks in your kitchen.
Yeah, because, you know, in the beginning when we had the idea, we called manufacturers. We called around and said, we wanted to start with new lipsticks. We felt like that was a problem we both had. We could understand it. Everyone buys a new lipstick or tries to buy a new lipstick. Lipstick is a high trial product, so people are willing to, you know, try new brands that emerge. And it was a problem we thought we could easily explain. And so we went to manufacturers and we said, we're two women and we want to start this beauty company and we want to make new lipsticks. And they were all like, huh? We already have pink and we already have beige. Go find a nude out of our stock catalog, and like, I'm sure your customers will be happy. And we were like, okay, none of them get it. And if you can't service us now in the products that we find on the shelf, why would we pick something out of your catalog? And so we went on YouTube, and where you can learn absolutely anything. It's actually dangerous. And we learned how to make lipstick, and we went on Google, and we bought all the ingredients that you need for a lipstick, the dyes and the wax and the mold and the everything. And so from day one, we've been vegan and paraben-free and cruelty-free, because that was also very important to us. And we saw how women of color were taking hold of the natural movement. And so how could we start thinking about that and building a brand around that? And we just made it in our apartments in Harlem. Like, my apartment has lipstick fingerprints all on the walls. And our classmates were our first guinea pigs. So my roommate in college is this Indian girl, Janine, and like, she came in, and her 3 sisters who all have different ethnicities and different shade ranges, and then our black friends are different shade ranges came in, and our Hispanic friends of different shade ranges, and we kind of tweaked and moved and made the initial 6-shade collection one where everyone could find something. All of a sudden there was a brand speaking to you in some way, and that was at least the first nut we could crack. And so we started there, and since then we've expanded. We're in mattes, lip liners, lip gloss, eyeshadow, highlighter, nail polish, and foundation as of Friday. So we're really excited about that. I mean, that to us is like, the life of any beauty company is the moment where you say, this is my stake in the ground, this is who we are, and we are representing you in this way, not only in the formula, but in the shades that we create. And so we hope all the women of color that have come along with us on this journey are really proud of all the products that we create and the community that we've created around them.
Well, I remember the first time that, and we were talking about this earlier, the first time I found a foundation that matched my skin tone wasn't until I was well into my career. It always had to be mixed because all the undertones of the things that were off the shelf were red.
Yeah.
And so I just remember the first time I felt like I saw myself in the beauty counter, and that's really what you're speaking to.
Yeah. No one wants to look inflamed or on fire. So and we hear this from black women all the time that, like, honestly, beauty companies have been quite lazy.
Yeah.
Right? And you bring in I'm sure wonderful, nice, pale, thin white woman with 2 perfectly matched pale pink lips. And you can make a whole brand around her, and you up things and lower things in order to kind of get a range, but it's not authentic, right? If you'd actually started with that person, you would just build such a better product. And that's just what we do. We just start with a focus group full of women of different shade ranges and ethnicities, and then you just get a whole other, And so I am actually quite neutral undertone, not too yellow, not too red, and very oily. And I found that every product I've ever tried was way too red. Yeah. And then I just look kind of on fire by 3 hours in. And I'm like, who is that girl? And
I spent the most part of my teens looking very ashy because I picked something that was way too light for my skin. Yeah. I want to talk about your marketing strategy, but I want to come back to when you were then anointed and crowned Miss America. What was that moment like? I remember you describing the morning. I want you to walk us through that morning.
Yeah. I'll walk you through the evening because that's a little crazier and through that. But basically, the moment you win, your mind goes blank. It's one of those moments where you just can't remember a lot. And I just remember looking for my mom and dad because I was like, this must be going nuts right now. And then you're whisked away. You have a press conference. For about 20 minutes, rapid fire questions. I dealt with a lot of xenophobic and racist comments, which I was expecting, so that wasn't too shocking. But I think what was more shocking, so then you have about 20 minutes with your family and friends, and then you're kind of asked to go to bed and repack your belongings into 2 suitcases, quite literally, and you travel out of those 2 suitcases. You don't go home. I was lucky in the sense where I got to come to New York for our PR tour, but I didn't go home. I was just shipped clothes, and that was really it. And so that was, an adjustment. And I think I was home maybe 4 times, Christmas and Easter. And I was like, well, I don't really celebrate Easter, so if we need to change a little bit of holiday, sort of. And that was something they never encountered before, So it's interesting to see kind of that evolution, and they just never dealt with it. But the next morning, I remember I woke up and the conversation was, is Miss America too dark to be Miss India? And again, this whole idea of fairness came into play. And I remember, I was in college, and my college boyfriend, who was also South Asian, said, I think if my mother meets you, she's probably going to think you're a little too dark. And I'm considered a darker skinned South Asian. Growing up, I remember in 3rd grade, I went to the dermatologist, and I had a patch of eczema on my face, and he gave me a cream for it. And I said, do you have a cream that will make me be lighter? And so this is so pervasive in our culture from such a young age. And it was something that when I read that headline, I was just over it. So over it on so many levels because, I think we had talked about this, is that I think as female, we deal with it much more than our male counterparts. And this is something I've talked extensively with my co-founder, Rushi, that's amazing, with Abrami, and kind of building out our mission was really how do we change a mindset of a group of people that is so embedded over centuries that this exists, not only within South Asian culture, but really, yes, globally, it's ingrained.
And it's really tied to your self-worth.
Exactly. And as women, we deal with it much more.
Well, you brought up your skincare line, and you're really using that day when the headlines just panned you for all the reasons in the world. You're using that to fuel the platform today and your skincare line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say that I think the biggest thing is, as everyone's like, well, how did you launch? And I will always first and foremost say finding the right people to launch it with who really truly believe and understand where you're coming from. And that just wouldn't exist with someone outside of our culture. For me personally, like I just didn't find that. Second, I have to give a tribute, and I genuinely mean this to Amanda and KJ, because as I was really thinking about this, it was really in the year 2015 to 16 was the year, and I was listening to every single podcast out there. It was also when like Glossier was really taking off, so I was listening to Emily. I was listening to just all the good advice that you can possibly get from incredible women that you want to follow. And Mented was the first one that I really found a connection with. And I think it was so interesting because the fact that you guys really believed in it, and every time I heard a podcast where you shared like such valuable information about your personal stories, that was what I connected with more than, I mean, obviously I'm wearing Nude Lala.
Yes.
Today, just so you guys know, like, obviously I love the product, but like the story for me was so much more impactful. And the fact that they recognized that and that emotional connection that you were able to find was something that I looked towards. And I remember thinking, well, they've done something right here. And they've done it really well because it's meaningful and people are connecting with it. And I think that there was also an underrepresentation with skincare with the Indian American community or South Asian community, and there was an opportunity to do that. But it's not just about skincare. What's the underlying message that we're advocating for? And that's why I loved Mented so much, and that's why I hope people love Avrani for that reason too.
And you're also mixing up a lot of what we find in our mother's kitchen, which
Right.
is neem and turmeric.
Yes.
And we're not going to go mix that in a bowl and then put it on our face. We
Right.
kind of love that there's access immediately, like in your shower.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think if you do a DIY turmeric mask at home, it also leaves a yellow stain on
stain.
it. Yes.
It's not just not on your, it's everywhere.
Right.
It's everywhere.
In your nails.
Yeah. And we live in a
Like,
world
what?
where we just don't have time for that, but we also want that. And I remember kind of one of the first iterations that we had with Avrani was, I remember I was like, Rishi, this kind of takes me back to like my childhood. And we were a little like teary-eyed over that moment, which is what we're hoping to create is this.
It's evoking that emotion.
Exactly. And it's so embedded in our culture and also being able to share that.
Amanda, I want to talk about marketing because your marketing strategy was, to what you alluded to, you went to your friends and family, but then you started to reach out to influencers, and that's when you really took off.
Well, first, let me also shout out Avrani because KJ and I have tried the turmeric mask, which we were given at a panel, and we are so excited for what you guys are doing and so supportive that there are more women in the conversation, more women doing the thing that they know and that they love and building companies around it. And we both tried it, and KJ did the whole thing on Instagram. She loves Instagram stories, and so she plotted it out for a whole day, but we were literally like FaceTiming, like, what do you think? And we both like had our mask on. So anyway, we're huge fans.
So that's marketing 101.
Right. Always had our samples, and we had our samples, and we were like, oh, we're trying this tonight. So it is great, get the mask. But marketing.
Yeah, well,
And
you
how
started to
it's
reach out to
taken on.
influencers.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it's one of those things that you hear all the stats, right? Women of color get funded less. Well, women overall get, like, no funding. And then women of color get this much funding. Good luck, like, you're a headline just because you got $1. You know what I mean? And it's quite bleak, honestly. And so in the beginning, there weren't many investors who were willing to take the chance on two girls saying, hey, women of color need makeup too. You know, we would walk into rooms and the white guy across from us at the table would say, well, my wife doesn't have a problem finding makeup. It's like, well, good for her. I don't know what to tell you about this. That is a whole other thing. And so we knew we needed to prove traction early on in a different way, in a way that we couldn't do like the white guy who just had a great idea and could walk into a room and get $1 million check. We needed to prove that there was a real audience and real demand for not only the brand we were building, but the products that we were building. And so right away we were like, well, where do people of color go online to learn about makeup? Influencers. And so with our full-time jobs, we spent a lot of time on the side, under the table, in conference rooms, DMing just influencers and saying, look, I'm not asking for a review. I have no money to pay you, but my friend and I are very passionate about bringing products to the market for women of color. Could you just try it? Just try it. You see products all the time. Let us know what you think. And we sent this. We would make our handmade samples on a Saturday. We'd make maybe 15 people's worth of samples, so 15 of our 6 shades. And then I would go to the post office on Monday and I'd mail them all out. And it was this thing that we did for a year. And we just, all of a sudden, it just took off at one point. Like, when you just hit a point and you don't really realize how everything's clicked into place.
What does that mean, take off? What was your metric to decide that it had taken off?
Yeah, so we created at Minted Cosmetics on Instagram, and we've been sending products out and getting feedback and tweaking things, and at a certain point, quite a few influencers had it. Quite a few, I mean, double digits of people had it. And so on Instagram, you'll see one thing here and one thing there, but once you feel like you start to see it from multiple sources, you're like, oh, this is a thing. And not only is it a thing, but because now multiple sources, so people in your world, your friends, if you will, are all recommending this thing, you feel now that much more instantly connected to it, right? So now it feels like this thing that has always been around, and you've always known, and you've always loved, and the comfort level goes up 10x. And so the summer of 2016, there were quite a few influencers on Instagram who had the product and were testing it and talking about it, and it was just this inflection point. And one day we were at work, and I was managing our Instagram account at the time, and I called her. I think she was a consultant, so she was in the middle of nowhere helping people with whatever, and it just, the Instagram account went up into the hundreds, and then we hit the thousands in a moment, in an afternoon. And we were just like, what is going on? What is happening? We checked, and then 3 very prominent influencers had written a review, or not written a review, had created a video. And they were like, yeah, we got the samples from them. They wrote us a really nice note, and we saw some other influencers on Instagram who also said they tried, and so we took a chance. And with their hundreds of thousands of followers, they made a review. Put Minted on models, had put them in a photo shoot, or whatever the content was, and it just took off. And we always tell the story because it's the little things. It is the handwritten note. It is the persistence to continue to make your sample and continue to go to the post office week after week, to continue to pour your heart and soul and effort and time into this thing that, if you really believe in it, will eventually become a thing, right? And so when that happened, we were like, okay, we feel re-empowered. We're ready to go back to investors, because now we can say, actually, the internet has said that Minted is a thing, and there are these women that want to buy it. And so we threw up a landing page and started collecting email addresses. And so when we launched, we had hundreds of women who'd already given us their information and said, I'm interested. I don't quite know what it is, but if you're going to start making products for people who look like me, I'll buy in. And so that is what led investors to say, okay, I think you have something. It wasn't the numbers, it wasn't how big the market is, it wasn't how much you guys buy, because we know women of color outspend white women by multiples in beauty. None of that was convincing. It was the number of email addresses, the number of Instagram follows, the likes, the shares. And so also I always share, if there's a small business that you love, and it is run by women of color, support. It is actually important to get the to get the share. The thing that you think is small and might not be impactful really will become impactful when it comes to their fundraising. Leave that review. Tell your friends. It is important that we get all of those touch points to our businesses the way we're giving it to other businesses.
And it's in our collective power to do that kind of raising awareness.
Yeah.
This is the last question I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to open it up to everybody in the room. You touched on the fundraising point. I think some $60 million was raised last year in VC money. Women got 2%. Women of color got 0.2%. You have managed to buck all of those norms because you raised $1 million in the first year. You raised $3 million this past May. I know that Anne-Marie definitely wants to hear about this specifically. How were you able to transcend all of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's this thing that we kind of laugh at because we look back and we're like, whoa, the last 2 years has been a whirlwind. And there's no secret sauce. I mean, the right people in the right time and a lot of things lined up for the right moment. So we launched in January 2017 with $50,000 in the bank from one investor, this woman who went to HBS who wrote a check after she saw our samples at a Starbucks and really believed in us. And then we had to prove to get the rest. And so traction took off. I mean, demand just took off as soon as we launched because no one had ever seen the thing that like how we were doing it, and we were doing it in this really authentic way and broadly speaking. So we were all, from day one, we've had a representation of Hispanic, South Asian, Middle Eastern, Black models, and so we've never been ashamed to say this is a company for women of color. In fact, unapologetic about it. Like, this is the line, and this is who we serve, and we're proud to do it, and we're not hiding it. And women really connected with that message. And so as we took off, then all of a sudden investors are like, oh, what is this thing? Like the tables turn a little bit and you stop asking so much as being like, well, let me evaluate you now. And so that happens in a real way. And the press was really our friends. I mean, we became the darlings, if you will, of this like movement of diversity and beauty when 3 months after we launched, we'd already been in 40 press publications. And I remember our publicist was like, just by the way, this never happens. And like, I cannot promise you that this will continue to happen. And somehow it continues to happen. And then Fenty launched fall 2017, which was also really a boom to us. Like, finally, even more people are talking about diversity and beauty and talking about how important it is. And so a lot of things have lined up over the last 2 years. But what I will say tactically is that, number one, we always crafted our message for who was in the room. What we realized really early on is, like, you can say all the stats you want to a white guy sitting across from you. If he doesn't get it and his wife's not white, and his wife is white, he's never going to connect to you. He'll say, oh, just leave me some samples and I'll give it to my daughter. Okay, well, your daughter's also white. Or I'll give it to my assistant, and that's when you're being dismissed. And so we made sure that we recrafted the pitch, and we had different decks, and so they could always hear us wherever they were. Because the reality is, we are still the minority when it comes to VC money, right?
But give me an example. Like, who did you tailor one way versus another?
So if someone had invested into Glossier, we'd say, we're the Glossier for women of color. We are young, we're millennial, we're online, we're fresh, but we're doing it for women of color. Oh, okay, Glossier's doing well and they've raised a lot of money. I can get it, right? Or, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Tristan Walker and Walker & Co., right? Like, so his premise was to make personal care products for people of color. He's raised a bunch of money in doing it. So we were like, we're the Tristan Walker & Co. of beauty. So you get it. You've already put money into this thing, and but this is the twist of how it's different. And so, we can never say we're the Uber of this or we're the Shake Shack of that. But we always crafted the message in a way that, the white guy across from us could be like, oh, I do that.
You gave them a frame of reference that they already were familiar with.
Right. And so, the reality is people invest in people, and people invest in people they know. And so if you're a white man walking into a room with a white guy across from you, it is easy for him to be like, oh, we both play lacrosse, and you went to Dartmouth, I went to Dartmouth, and we have the hat, and therefore here's $5 million for this idea that who knows if it works.
Yeah.
But instantly when I walk in the room, you're talking about skin tones and being lighter, there's no hiding who I am. There's no hiding what I bring. There's no way to cover it up or downplay it or be this other person. And so all I can be is myself, and all I can say is my story.
Right.
And so what you learn to do is be quite creative in how you make sure that resonates with the person across from you. And so we just learned how to do that. And we had a deck for different people. We had subject lines for different emails. And we got very crafty, if you will, at making sure the person across from us heard us in an authentic way. And then at some point, your metrics just speak for yourself. And so one round begets another round, and it gets marginally easier because now you're the proven horse in the race, And so, honestly, what we hope to do is just continue to bring more people into the room that look like us. Like, when we first started, we'd walk into a drinks thing for a VC, and, we're the only woman, or we're the only brown people. And, we want to change that. There should be more people in the room who look like us because they have just as much valid ideas as a guy who wants to do another pizza thing or another Uber.
And Nina, I remember you saying too that you wanted to change the way Miss America, the brand, was perceived because America had changed.
Oh, absolutely. I think, it's interesting because Miss America, walking into it, is a loaded stereotype that I've experienced, and in terms of fundraising myself as everything. And I think one of the reason why I waited the longest in terms of starting a beauty brand, one, because I didn't find the right co-founder, but two, and a large part of it was really, I remember thinking if I'd worked so hard in terms of building my message in the diversity advocacy space, I'd done so much work with the Obama administration. I really loved it. I was thinking of actually going to get my public policy degree, and right after I'd finished my year, and I was really loving that role. And I remember thinking, if I start a beauty brand, that's just added to the stereotype. Oh, Miss America, she just started a beauty brand, and that was so frustrating to me. Also, as much as we value influencers, even in building Avrani, and I think it's huge for beauty brands. It was something where I was getting asked to do a lot of that in terms of people sending me things and products, and I consistently said no from the beginning, and it's interesting to see where the bubble will go. I think we're kind of at that tipping point cusp right now, because I remember thinking to myself from the beginning, this was right, 2014, 2015, as it was taking off, I said, if I'm really going to advocate, if I'm really going to get behind something and ask people to buy it or become so-called influencer, I want to have stake in the game. And I want it to be something I really believe in and care about. And so that was kind of also what led me to really, I realized that there was a way to do this in the right way, that where I was having my voice heard in the way I wanted it to be heard, and creating something that is resonating with others.
A life by design, not a life by default. I'd like to open it up to questions. Normally, because it's a bigger crowd, I always have index cards, but this is a nice little intimate group, so ask away, please.